3. The Concorde. In 2018, the British newspaper Daily Star published shocking photos of a paradoxically futuristic-looking, yet neglected aircraft sitting at an engineered base outside Heathrow Airport in London. At first glance, it would be easy to mistake the dilapidated plane for a military jet. But in reality, it's a defunct passenger airliner that once carried civilians across the Atlantic between Europe and North America for nearly 30 years. During the early 1960s, the United Kingdom and France entered a historic agreement to develop a supersonic commercial jet known as the Concorde. 6 prototypes were designed starting in 1965, and in 1969, the plane took off from the French city of Toulouse for its first flight. In 1975, the chosen design received its certificate of airworthiness in both France and Britain. The 203-foot-long, 62 meters, aircraft looked much different than a conventional passenger plane. It had a triangular wing design known as a delta wing, a long, slender fuselage, and a pointed nose that was lowered to a drooping position during takeoff and landing. These features enabled it to fly at more than twice the speed of sound, reducing the flight time from New York City to London from 7 hours to less than 3.5 hours. The Concorde had a takeoff speed of 250 miles per hour, 402 kilometers per hour, and an average cruising speed of 1,350 miles per hour, 2,173 kilometers per hour. It flew much higher than any other passenger jet at a cruising altitude of 56,000 feet, 17,069 meters. Passenger service began in 1976 under British Airways and Air France. 27 years later, in 2003, both airlines announced that they plan to retire the Concorde later that year due to low passenger numbers. At the time, there was a decrease in air travel due to the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, and a cost of $8,000 for a round-trip ticket between New York and London in 1997, the equivalent of almost $14,900 today, meant that flying on the aircraft wasn't an option for the average person. The Concorde was also largely limited to transoceanic flights due to the extremely loud supersonic booms that it created when it broke the sound barrier. For this reason, overland flights were banned in most countries, including the US. In certain cases, the aircraft was required to decelerate during its journey to prevent noise pollution over populated areas. And at one point, the Concorde was used for subsonic flights. But this wasn't profitable, and it didn't last long before the routes were canceled. The number of passengers decreased even more after a catastrophic accident occurred in the year 2000. Shortly after taking off from Paris for New York, a Concorde flying under Air France crashed, killing all 109 people aboard. At a time when the aircraft's 2 operating airlines were already struggling to attract passengers, the deadly collision had a damaging effect on the aircraft's reputation. After the disaster, the already limited customers grew even smaller, making it increasingly difficult to sell flights. By then, the Concorde was becoming outdated anyway. Because it was the only supersonic passenger jet, there had been little pressure to update it over the year, and in some ways, its technology fell behind the advancing systems of subsonic passenger planes. Simply put, the Concorde was undeniably impressive, but it was also costly and impractical. It was no longer making its operators enough money to justify keeping it in service. Only 14 Concordes were ever built for commercial use. Some of them ended up in museums, while others, like the one that ended up at Heathrow Airport, were less fortunate. From a distance, the neglected aircraft, known as Concorde Alpha Bravo, appeared to be in decent shape, but those who got a closer look quickly noticed that it was little more than a pitiful, decaying wreck. After not flying for 18 years, its carpets, overhead bins, seats, and other interior furnishings had been completely gutted. Holes were also drilled into the floor to drain rainwater that leaked into the fuselage. and most of the cockpit dials had been removed. On top of all that, there were rumors that the dilapidated Concorde was rat-infested. To the aviation enthusiasts who fell in love with the legendary aircraft, Alpha Bravo deserved more respect and a final resting place where it could be admired and appreciated. But moving and restoring a non-functional airplane is an expensive endeavor. For now, the Concorde remains outside Heathrow, where it continues to slowly lose its battle against time and nature. If you were the lone survivor of a plane crash, would you sell your story to movie producers? Or would you write a book detailing the events you lived through? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 2. Tupolev Tu-144. Home to more than 1.2 million residents, Kazan is Russia's fifth largest city, with a history dating back more than 1,000 years. It's located in the country's southwestern region and is famous for its unique blend of Russian and ethnic Tatar cultures, which has influenced everything from its architecture to its cuisine. But Kazan has also caught people's attention for more mysterious reasons in recent years. Nestled among what appears to be a collection of apartment buildings on the city's outskirts is an abandoned Soviet supersonic jet called the Tupolev Tu-144. It's wedged between a row of trees, a housing complex, and a parking lot. In other words, it looks like it's parked in someone's backyard. The fact that the property is actually a military base only makes the aircraft seem slightly less out of place. And when photos of it appeared online in 2014, aviation enthusiasts began to dig diligently to get to the bottom of its seemingly strange location. Developed during the 1960s, the Tu-144 earned the distinction of being the world's first commercial supersonic transport aircraft. It took its maiden flight in 1968, just 2 months before the Concorde, and went supersonic the following year. In 1970, it became the first passenger jet of its kind to fly at more than twice the speed of sound. Measuring 216 feet, 66 meters long, the Tu-144 was similar in shape and size to the Concorde, and it was designed with similar capabilities in mind. However, the aircraft didn't start out great, and it crashed violently during its debut at the 1973 Paris Air Show. Right as the plane was expected to land, it entered a steep climb, then plummeted dramatically toward the ground, breaking apart in midair moments before it crashed. All 6 crew members died, as well as 8 people on the ground, and 15 houses were destroyed. While there are conflicting theories about what exactly went wrong, the general consensus among experts is that the pilots had deviated from their approved flight plan while under instructions to outperform the Concorde. The plane's stability and control augmentation system malfunctioned during the risky maneuvers, and the aircraft failed to self-correct, causing the crew to lose control of it. Regardless of what caused the accident, it had a severely damaging effect on the public's confidence in the Tu-144. The Soviets, nevertheless, continued on with its development, and in 1977, passenger service began. From the beginning, however, the aircraft proved to be extremely unreliable. The Tu-144 suffered from dozens of serious failures early on, including cabin decompression and overheating in the engine exhaust duct, resulting in at least 80 canceled or delayed flights. On one occasion, the plane's alarm system began blaring obnoxiously in the middle of a flight. Aviation officials predicted that some of the landing gear would fail, requiring the pilots to land without it at a high rate of speed. They couldn't get the alarm to turn off, so everyone on the aircraft had to deal with the noise for the remaining 75 minutes of the flight. As it turned out, a faulty sensor triggered the alarm, and the Tu-144 landed just fine. Passenger service was canceled in 1978, after just 7 months and 55 flights. The aircraft failed for various reasons, including the ongoing mechanical issues and rising oil prices driving up operational costs. The Soviet government continued to use the Tu-144 for freight service until the program's official cancellation in 1983. In the end, only 16 units were ever produced, Some of them were dismantled and sold for scrap following the collapse of the Soviet Union, while others were donated to museums or kept in storage. The Tu-144 in Kazan was developed for passenger service, but was only ever used in test flights. It took its final voyage in 1976 and proceeded to its current resting place, where it was put on open display. In 2017, someone listed it on eBay at an asking price of $7.5 million, but nobody took them up on the offer, and the awkwardly placed Soviet relic remains at the military base to this day. 1. PZL TS-11 Iskra. The seemingly unremarkable village of Wolka Nosowska in east-central Poland is home to just 400 residents. Yet it managed to go viral in 2019, when an aerial image of an abandoned plane surrounded by trees began circulating online. The image originally appeared on Welsh photographer Tom Dolman's Instagram page. His followers were instantly captivated by the aircraft's unusual placement in the middle of a vast grove of trees. People were also curious about what drew Dolman to an obscure town in the middle of nowhere, and they wanted to know the story behind the plane. Based on the photo, it appeared as though the aircraft was largely hidden from view at ground level, also begging the question of how the British photographer found it in the first place. Journalist Krzysztof Basil initially suspected that the image was doctored because it was so bizarre. He tracked Dolman down and asked him the burning questions that internet users around the world wanted to know the answers to. Dolman confirmed that the photo was in fact genuine, and he reassured Basil that he only touched it up minimally. The clouds were added, and he removed a trailer that he felt was interfering with the image's composition, but left everything else as is. He proved it by providing Basil with map coordinates of its location. A closer look via Google Earth revealed that the jet is next to a house, suggesting that perhaps it belongs to the homeowners. Dolman said that he visits Poland often because his girlfriend is from there. He first spotted the plane while traveling the countryside with her and a group of friends. His girlfriend noticed its wing sticking out of the grove and pointed it out to him. After realizing what a fascinating sight he'd stumbled upon, Dolman made plans to return when the weather was more favorable so that he could capture some photos with his drone. After taking several aerial snapshots, he returned to Britain and perfected his favorite image before posting it on Instagram. Dolman never expected the photo to go viral. In fact, he told Basil that he was worried his friends might even think it was boring. But the intriguing picture quickly racked up thousands of likes among friends and strangers online. The aircraft was identified as a Polish-made jet trainer called the PZL TS-11 Iskra. Designed in the late 1950s, it was the first domestically developed Polish jet aircraft. The idea behind its creation stemmed from the country's desire to be able to independently manufacture its own military planes. This was at a time when Poland was under the political and economic control of the neighboring Soviet Union as a satellite state. Prior to Joseph Stalin's death in 1953, all of Poland's aircraft development projects and design offices were liquidated. USSR officials heavily discouraged these pursuits and instead urged former members of Poland's Aviation Institute to accept roles that severely limited their creative freedom. However, these developers continued to push for their right to design planes, and eventually the Polish government began to support these efforts. The TS-11 was developed in response to a specific set of criteria put forth by the Polish Air Force for a jet-propelled trainer aircraft, which sought to replace the military's aging piston engine planes. The first prototype carried out its maiden flight in 1960. 3 years later, the first delivery of the TS-11 rolled off the production line and entered service. Several variants were produced, including versions that could be armed with various weapons, such as bombs and rockets. There was also a reconnaissance variant, which is one of the few versions of the plane that was equipped with radar. The TS-11's design was fairly conventional for the period, and at first the plane didn't seem particularly remarkable. but it went on to set 4 world records in its class in 1964 for reaching an in-flight speed of 524 miles per hour, 839 kilometers per hour. 424 of the aircraft were produced between 1963 and 1987. The Indian Air Force imported its first shipment of 50 TS-11s in 1975, and during the 1990s, they received an additional 26 units. By then, production of the aircraft had been terminated due to a lack of demand. But the Polish military continued to use the TS-11 well into the 2000s. The Indian military took its last TS-11s out of service in 2004. While the aircraft's service years were somewhat uneventful, it served its purpose well and proved to be reliable and well-built. To this day, the TS-11 remains the first and only Polish-made jet trainer that achieved serial production. Unfortunately, the details behind the lone aircraft that Dolman photographed are mostly a mystery. According to the Polish news source Onet, the plane is privately owned. Its current keeper reportedly bought it in 2004 at the Biała Podlaska airport in eastern Poland. And that's pretty much all anyone knows about it. Even Redditors, who are known for unraveling internet mysteries, were unable to find additional information about the TS-11's backstory. But it certainly makes for an appealing photo, and the story of how Dolman discovered it seemingly out of nowhere is interesting enough. Which of these planes would you most like to see in person? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.